is on the issue of usefulness. So this is our next level 3 type question. And this usefulness question always becomes a bit of an issue. People often answer this question quite poorly. So we want to really think about how we can do this question better. It's actually not difficult. I think in some ways answering usefulness is a bit easier than answering about reliability. The main thing to understand is that while there are overlaps between usefulness and issues of reliability, it's not the same question. So usefulness, we are thinking about what perspective is shown. What am I learning from the source that I otherwise wouldn't have known? Even if that source is somewhat untrustworthy. So I may not actually trust all the information that's in that source because there are issues of bias, but despite that, it's still useful to me. I still need to actually use the source to understand certain perspectives. So you're thinking about how the source helps you to answer a particular question. Now, when historians are doing actual historical research, they're looking through thousands and thousands of different documents, and some of those documents will be completely irrelevant and not useful at all. But when you're in the context of a history assessment, all the sources that you get given are obviously going to be relevant. If you've got a test on the French Revolution, we're not suddenly going to give you a source that relates to a civil war in Angola. You're going to have a source that connects to the topic that you've been given. So whenever you get a question about usefulness in these tests and exams, the source is always useful. So you don't ever have to say, well, the source is not that useful, because the source is always useful. It can always tell me something, even if I think it might not be so trustworthy. So don't get confused about whether the source has got bias, so therefore it's not useful. No, it still has use because it is giving me a particular perspective. So what you need to think about is, when I'm answering this question, whose point of view, what point of view is shown in the source, whose opinion does the source tell me about, and then what is the information contained in the source? So what is the content of that opinion? How is it actually going to help me understand things? So we're going to go back to source C, looking at this as an example. This was from Marat, who was a radical journalist, someone who was very pro the Jacobin Party. And he is talking about justifying why he thinks the Reign of Terror is necessary. It's quite a dramatic source. He's talking about chopping off 300,000, a few hundred heads to save 300,000 people. He's talking about spilling a few drops of impure blood, which is the people who are being killed as counter-revolutionaries, to prevent torrents. It's a fast-moving stream, like a river, among the blameless. So we need to crush the counter-revolutionaries to save our native land. So very emotive language. If I was answering a question about whether the source is reliable for knowing about what happened during the Reign of Terror, not very reliable because he's using all these dramatic images. If I wanted to know if it was reliable for knowing what Marat thought, it is actually reliable. But I want to know, how is the source useful to me in understanding the Reign of Terror? So the thing I need to think about, again, I have to pay attention to this little top section. Who has created the source? Okay, this is Marat. We know that he was a Jacobin, that he was in favor of their policy of the Reign of Terror. I also see that this is from 1793, during the time period of the Reign of Terror. So those things are both going to be very useful to me. So if I think about this, the source is always useful. I'm thinking about who, when, where, etc. There's often enough points to make here that you can actually get the 4 marks just here, but I could also write about this. So if we're going to do this source together, we're going to say the source is useful because it shows us the opinion of the Jacobin journalist Marat, who is in favor of the Reign of Terror. So that would be 2 marks. Now, the other thing I might want to say in my answer is that it's from the time, so that's useful because it's a primary source. But if I didn't want to go with that line of argument, the other thing I could talk about is what actually happens in the source. So I could say that he's in favor of the revolution because he's talking about that it's necessary to squash the counter-revolutionaries so that they don't actually lose the land of France. I feel like my stronger point is going to be about talking about the date. So I'm going to say the source is a primary source from 1793. If I stop there, I don't get any marks. You actually need to explain why that is useful, which means that we get first-hand information from someone involved in the events. Now, that is not going to mean that I necessarily trust everything he's saying, but it does give me an accurate description and a helpful, useful description of what someone like Marat, who was a Jacobin, actually thinks. So that's how we answer a usefulness question. You can, generally speaking, get enough marks just from engaging with who created this author, what kind of perspective is shown. And then if you need to, you can also go into basically what that opinion actually was. What is it showing me?